Our Torah service would begin now, but for reasons of social distancing, we are the only ones in the sanctuary, along with Luis, our sound engineer. And in that regard, no calling up to the Torah, no reading from Torah and Haftorah. But we will use this time slot to talk about what our Torah reading and Haftorah would be, and for me to do a little sharing. But before I move forward into the Torah service, I want to just pause to acknowledge my goosebumps. And that's a result of listening to Amy chant Hallel to the sounds of silence. The combination for me of the familiar, the words are so familiar, but that's the first time I've heard it put to the sounds of Simon and Garfunkel, just moved me. And that will be the theme, not Simon and Garfunkel and not Amy singing, but this quality of goosebumps will be the focus of my Devar Torah. More specifically, what is the enormous gains of using our minds analytically with the skills of the scientists to discern new cures. And at the same time, what are the limitations of science, or if you will, what are the gains of silence, and what's the nature of goosebumps? Our Torah reading this morning is one of the more difficult, frankly, to relate to, in that Tazria-Metzorah deals with skin infections. It's often translated as leprosy. And Leviticus, it's two parshiot, Tazria and Metzorah are combined, would be our Torah reading from our first scroll. And then because today is the new month, the new moon of Iyar, we would have the reading from a second scroll, describing from Numbers chapter 28 the offerings that are brought for Rosh Chodesh. And then the Haftorah would be from Isaiah, describing a friendship between David and his best friend Jonathan that links to an expression of from moon to moon. And new months begin with the appearance of that sliver of moon in the sky. So tonight, look up. Skies are now clearer, and you will see what began last night as a little sliver of moon. It'll be darker. You'll see more stars tonight. And the moon will grow and then recede. And so, focusing on our Devar Torah and our Torah reading of Tazria-Metzorah, Leviticus. We are told of Metzorah. Metzorah, the rabbis will later define as Motzi Shem Ra, an acronym for the one who brings out evil speech against another. For this physical ailment is understood by the rabbis later, though not explicitly in the Torah, as a punishment for wrongful speech. And you'll find that it appears in two other places in Torah. Moses, when speaking to God, will say at the burning bush, "But God, maybe they won't believe me when I say that you have sent me." And then God says, "Now take your right hand and reach it into your cloak and pull it out," displaying the miracle that the hand that was, if you will, leprous is now no longer. But the rabbis will say that because Moses spoke ill of the people of Israel, so that's why his hand turned white. And that is the nature of our Torah reading. And Miriam will speak ill of Moses and his relationship with Zipporah later on. And we're not told exactly what her critique is, but she too will develop a quality of leprosy. And Aaron, who's in this conversation of gossip with Miriam, will say to Moses, "Pray for our sister." And that short 5-word prayer, El na rafana lad, please God heal her, will be expressed, and Miriam's leprosy will be healed. And so those are 2 examples of misuse of the tongue, skin ailment, and our parsha, Tazria-Metzorah. I was curious about the history of medicine, and so at home we have what at this point is a collector's item, soon to be given away, hopefully to another collector, and that's Encyclopedia Britannica. But as I tend not to do word searches on Shabbat on my technology, I went out in our bonus room, found my Encyclopedia Britannica, and this morning's parsha was cited in the history of medicine, namely a recognition already in the Bible for a need to quarantine a person who's been struck with this illness. Let me read for you those verses. It's chapter 13, 45-46. As for the person with a leprous affection, his clothes shall be torn, his head shall be left uncovered, and he shall cover over his upper lip. And as he goes out in public, he shall call out, Tameh, Tameh, impure, impure. He shall be impure as long as the disease is on him. Being Tameh, being impure, he shall dwell apart. His dwelling shall be outside the camp. And so in Encyclopedia Britannica, in the discussion on the history of medicine, this paragraph is cited as a early and to some degree not followed in the larger world recognition that when a person has an infectious, potentially in disease, they are to be quarantined. Now, if you read the parsha clearly, you see that there isn't exactly a medical treatment. Well, there wasn't a medical treatment then for this skin disease. When we use the word often to describe it as here, a leprous affection, I pause to remember our beloved congregant Larry Wayne, who was a microbiologist, and Larry Wayne was actually in charge of the international committee that gave the new names for infectious diseases. And as a microbiologist, he was one to educate me that leprosy, which we call Hansen's disease today, in which fingers can rot and fall off, in which there are very specific criteria, is not the description of the Bible. This is not what we today in modern medicine call leprosy. But this illness was apparently not only of the flesh, but lumped together in our Torah reading with impacting on cloth, on houses. So fungus of a larger generic kind was identified, and as I mentioned, by the rabbis was a punishment for specific acts of misuse of the tongue. The 2 most famous Jewish doctors of the Middle Ages are Maimonides, 12th century, and Nachmanides of Gerona, Spain, of the 13th century. These 2 physicians said, this is not the illness of our own day, that this is a punishment unique to the land of Israel for moral wrongs, and that is not what happens in our day outside the land of Israel. And they said in their respective commentaries that Israel has such a quality of being a living entity that it's morally responsive to immorality. And therefore, uniquely, these events occurred in the land of Israel and would occur not just to human flesh, but to cloth and to houses. Such is the moral sensitivity of Israel. With that, What I want to focus in on is how hygiene and bacteria is remarkably recent as a scientific understanding. You know, the first microscope to really be able to identify microorganisms was in Holland in the 1600s. The man who used that microscope was Anton van Leeuwenhoek, who, by coincidence, was neighbors with the great artist Vermeer. And Vermeer would draw with his enormous talent what Van Hoek would show him under the microscope in terms of our first documented microorganisms in the 1600s, middle 1600s. But Van Hoek, who was the first to see such entities, it would be almost 200 years later that specific microorganisms would be identified with illness. In fact, the first surgery that was to take place with an awareness that there needed to be some kind of antiseptic use before in the surgery is 1865 by Joseph Lister, like Listerine, the one who knew to kill germs. He was the first, 1865, building on some of the awareness of Louis Pasteur of at the same time, where Louis Pasteur, famous for pasteurizing milk, the one to identify that there are bacteria that can affect health, so that more people died in the course of surgeries from infections and other illness than from almost any other cause. So beginning in 1865, the first vaccine is 1895, and that was for smallpox. And that was Edward Jennings, who had the following, by coincidence almost, discovery. And that was smallpox was a major problem. And what people were starting to wonder is if they took a little of the pus of somebody with smallpox and injected it into somebody, by virtue of it being a lower dose, maybe they would have an immunity. They had a sense that once you got it, you didn't get it again. But when they were injecting the smallpox directly, people were dying. And Jennings got the idea that cows had pox, and maybe he could try taking some of the pox from a cow and injecting it as he did into a boy, and that the response from cowpox was not as strong as it was with human smallpox. And then this boy, whose name should be remembered in history but did not get recorded in Encyclopedia Britannica, was then given an injection of smallpox after, but he survived that, seemed to be fine. He seemed to have an immunity from the cowpox. That's the first vaccine. We live in a remarkable time, and Yuval Harari, the great student of history, the professor of Hebrew University, has written that what is distinctive in this moment of coronavirus is that science now is clearly, universally, with some exceptions, understood to be science to be followed. He noted that synagogues in Israel are closed for the first time. Mosques in Iran are closed. The Vatican is closed. Because what the great church, mosque, Hindu, Buddhist, what humans have grown to understand is that when they say that this is due to a virus and have the tools to actually see the virus and test for the virus, and that it's contagious, that you shouldn't gather in big places. And Yuval Harari as a critique and part of religion, says, religion to a great degree was always focused on death because that was the human condition. Throughout most of human history, we didn't have real tools to respond to illnesses. We didn't know the nature of illnesses. We didn't have vaccines. And religion was a response of human vulnerability to the fear of death by illness. And religion came to provide hope for another life. And Yuval Harari, in this critique, in this moment of last week of an article, says, and now religions around the world have to acknowledge that there are ways to prolong life and that human intelligence can be harnessed collectively in order to prevent death. Now, I mentioned my goosebumps because what I want to discern is the distinction between the value and power of science and the value and power of religion, despite the fact that what was described in our Torah reading today is not the illness and not the cure that we would have today. So back to our parsha. I once asked a historian of medicine why the major illness provided in the Torah is leprosy. And he said, because it was the one illness that people could live with for a long time that made you look on the door of death with your skin turning many colors and a person growing weak, but could survive. And so he said, unlike other illnesses, there weren't antibiotics. People died from infections. With leprosy, they could survive. That was his surmise. Well, in the Torah reading, yes, there is isolation, but there are no medical tools. Today, we have the medical tools. We have microscopes. We have ways of understanding the makeup of a cell and how a virus penetrates a cell. And God willing, with time, we will have vaccines. Scientists are saying that this coronavirus, COVID-19, will only end when we all get it. That's a really weighty thought. It doesn't mean we'll necessarily get it directly. You can get it from a vaccine. But we won't be able to breathe out until everybody has had it on some level. And so we wait. But we do wait with hope. I was talking to my son Joey yesterday, who's focused on startups and business, and he read a book called Good to Great. And he said that in that book, a description is provided of which soldiers were most successful. The least successful were the blind optimists. Because he says, as described in this book, that blind optimists had a lot of energy in the first phases of battle, but then were deeply disappointed as the war went on. Rather, the most successful leaders and most successful soldiers were people who lived with a paradox. And that paradox was they could look at reality squarely, harshly, see the genuine dangers before themselves, and yet simultaneously had this sense that in the end we will be victorious. That ability to look squarely at a situation and to do it with hope is the paradoxical ingredient of success. And so it is with science. Science looks squarely at what is a problem, and with patience waits to see what works and doesn't work. Because, as they say in Yiddish, an example is not a proof. Meaning, anecdotal evidence is not the same as scientific testing to see and comparing how does a person with a drug succeed to somebody without that drug. Because only then can you know, did they get better on their own or did the drug make the difference? And so it will take time to develop the vaccine. And yet, We are privileged to live in a time in which the development of vaccines can be done more speedily than at any time in history. And with the hope that what scientists learn now will make a difference in how fast it'll be the next time. A closing thought in terms of medicine, and then to talk about religion. And that is, in the history of medicine, progress has been international. It was Louis Pasteur in France who inspired a doctor in Germany to be the first to actually link specific microorganisms with specific illnesses, that would inspire a doctor in England like Lister to know that the operating room needed to be sanitized. Medical progress is remarkable in terms of the zigzag, how ideas have gone across borders as we share this common human need to be healthy. And that ideas build on each other. We live in a moment in which cooperation is an opportunity for scientists around the world. It would be a huge mistake for scientists to hold on to their information as they work on their vaccines without sharing ideas, because knowledge builds on knowledge. And more than ever, we are reminded in this moment how the world from outer space, that blue planet, has no borders. That everything travels, that somebody who gets a coronavirus in one part of the world will have somebody else get on an airplane the next day and bring it to another part of the world. We are interconnected, and cooperation must be how we progress, as we've always progressed in moving forward. But there is also a danger to science. Namely, in this moment, there are questions that also arise. Can you, should you track? Should the government track who has the illness for purposes of knowing who may they have encountered? Today, we can use biometrics to know how our heart is doing. We can have an Apple Watch that tells us our heart rate, that can tell us our temperature. And so we live with decisions that are between good and better, or if you will, between bad and worse, that require a balancing of values that is not the objective weighing of evidence that is the nature of the scientific inquiry. To determine values, to determine what to prioritize, takes another kind of calculation. And it has to be also intellectual. And that's the bridge to intuition. But that value building has to know what matters to keep a society whole. How do you create relationships? How do you maintain human dignity? Imagine North Korea. This is a Yuval Harari example, with people with biometrics and clapping hands as the great leader speaks. With biometrics, they'll be able to know whether their clapping is sincere or fake. Imagine having your own emotions monitored in that way. We have tools of science that can help heal, but we have tools of science that can be misused as well, which leads to religion. Religion at its best is the yearning to be our best. Religion at its best says that life is about love. And to know how to love another individual is not about a matter of a checklist. It's from the heart to the heart. It's intuitive. How to be loyal to a collective, and how to prioritize your needs and staying at home in this moment to protect others, as an example, is an example of collectivity and relationship with something beyond oneself, community. And on the highest level, that largest concentric circle of right and wrong, of what is love and what does it mean to be holy, namely, to see the world from a perspective of a caring creator, that is where the word God comes in. At its best, religion calls and invites us to be our most human, and as Abraham Joshua Heschel, that rabbi, taught, to be human is to be more than human. For we are animal-like, but we have this enormous capacity, both to analyze that unseen virus, but more, that ability to make sacrifices for the collective and more, to determine those values that are essential and require reevaluating between good and better, between bad and worse. And so as we study Torah, we do so acknowledging that Torah is a part of our collective journey, that there's a history to Metzorah, that this is not Hansen's disease. And yet, the rabbis will teach about the person who has leprosy, who has to declare, tameh, tameh, impure, impure. The rabbis will declare in the Talmud that that person declares it not just so that people stay away, but so that other people pray for that person. So that when that person is identified with what might not be easily noticed, that our hearts open up to care, to respond with care. That lesson that it's not just about us and them, but that life is ultimately, and that's where religion and God matter, to teach that it's not about us and them. We live in concentric circles of care, but all those circles are our world, are God's world, and our challenge is to connect beyond ourselves and to know that the question is not only whether to live or not, but how to live. And in this moment in which people are losing their jobs, to know on Shabbat that it's not what you do that gives you dignity, but your humanity that intrinsically makes you infinitely valuable. That in this time of illness, that there's reason to be hopeful and to feel the love of a caring creator and the love of fellow human beings. And so we pray, Ribono Shel Olam, Master of the universe, we celebrate your gifts of the human mind that we use, and the best scientists among us use, to make distinctions, to see the unseen, to find cures. We celebrate the power of the human mind that you've given us. And we also celebrate the power that you have given us to discern right and wrong, moral values. And we celebrate the gift of goosebumps that allow us non-rationally to experience surprise and joy and love and connection. May we grow in the fullness of our humanity. We are aware of the dangers of scientism, that false idolatry that would believe that science has all the answers to the dignity of human life. And we simultaneously condemn those who would dishonor the value of science to give us wisdom. Ribono Shel Olam, Master of the universe, we acknowledge our vulnerabilities, even our helplessness. We are born helpless, we die helpless, we live life, if we are open and wise, knowing that part of us is always helpless, but not hopeless, and not without the ability to make a difference. May we live with the paradox of helpless and powerful. May we live with faith that we have the courage to see reality clearly and the wisdom to know that this too shall pass. Ribono Shel Olam, Master of the universe, warm our hearts to each other. Kindle within us the sparks of hope. Amen.